And I think it's, they say that simplicity is this quality or condition to be easily understood or to do, to be plain, uncomplicated. And I recently heard simplicity described as a freedom from attachments, not just to things, but to ways of thinking, like freedom from a cultural, freedom from our own histories, which can sometimes feel so complicated. Oh, freedom from, I was thinking, judgment, double guessing ourselves, striving. Does that feel like some of the complications in your life that cause you to feel anxious? They do me. I double guess my motives. Do you ever do that? Why am I saying this? Why am I doing this? Have I got something going on? And maybe that's because our language isn't always simple. And you can sometimes, when you get to a situation, you think, I don't know what the person's trying to say to me. There's a complexity in the way that we often talk that guards ourselves. And simplicity says, no, I'm just going to say what I mean and leave it at that. But I think we all enjoy simplicity in lots of forms. I remember I loved the idea of school uniforms when I went to school. And I loved it because my parents at that point didn't have much in terms of money. And I remember I never had any of the clothes that I'd be able to wear if I turned up at school and everyone was wearing whatever, free dress. I hated free dress days. Did anyone else feel like that? I was terrified at free dress days. Like, what am I going to wear for a free dress day? But the simplicity of a uniform just took it all away. And sometimes I feel like that about life. I think that we make things so much more complicated. We take cooking and make cooking shows. How can boiling an egg be that complicated, Poaching an egg looks like an art form. I'm like, what is that about? I mean, the minimalist in home dressings. The other day I saw this article that said, if you want to dress your home simply, you need an interior designer. I was like, to just put white everywhere? I mean, I can put white everywhere, which is the theme of the day. We even make simplicity sometimes complex. We call things minimalist rather than just white. I love it. The other day I was hearing about another house design, another house like interior design. Men, if you're not interested in this, some men or some women, don't worry about this, it's just my little thing. And it was like, I'd heard someone say to me, I like the light blues and the light greys, or something like that. They wanted something for their house, and I was like, oh yeah, whatever. And when I went there, the lady said, you want the Hamptons? I said, at the store, you want the Hamptons? I said, the Hamptons? I just said blue or white or grey. She says, yes, that's the Hamptons. I thought, we're like that. We complicate everything. It's Ecclesiastes 7:30. God made man simple. Man's complex problems are of his own devising. It's true. Man's complexity is of his own devising, and golly, don't we devise it. But this guy, Richard Foster, had these ideas about the personal disciplines. And one of the ones he said we've got to consider, you're going to have to land where you land on this, okay? But I want to put it out there that one of the disciplines that he calls us into is the discipline of simplicity, where we actually kind of strip away everything and we actually just reveal ourselves, reveal our stuff, and we don't try and attach ourselves to a whole lot of stuff. And I think it's relatively easy to understand. I quite like the way he says it like this. He says, the Christian discipline of simplicity is an inward reality that results in an outward lifestyle. It starts inward. I think that's actually a really great thought to think about, because it is going to be seen in the outward. We kid ourselves if we think all the complexity that's going on in our lives and the desire for more and the building of more and the desire to earn more money and accrue more stuff, to have more prominence and more influence and more affluence. If we think that that's somehow okay, that's not what we're called to. But similarly, can I just say, if all we do is come up with a set of rules for not acquiring more, then we've also missed it. because it has to come out of this inward reality, this inward sense of... we can actually destroy ourselves by rules. You know that, don't you? We can destroy ourselves by having so many rules for not having more that we get completely tangled up. I went to America and I saw one time in Pennsylvania the Amish people. We're all familiar with the Amish, aren't we? It's kind of like it's a Christian strand that operates in North America. But the really interesting thing is hearing more and more of recent years that because it can be so rule-driven, so they ascribe to a life of simplicity. No cars, they still pull their farm machinery by horses, and it's a sense that, you have the clothing is, everyone looks the same, it's very simple, there's a uniformity. And they say if we can live plain, they're often called plain people, that will take all the complexity out of our life. But when you demand it of people, without something happening on the inside, all we do is set up an inner turmoil. Like, you've got to believe in it. And then it will have an outward reality. But it comes from somewhere, and it comes from somewhere deep within. Contemporary culture, right now, I would say it lacks an understanding of simplicity, outward and inward. I think it lacks it. I think instead we've got this incredible lust for power. And let me tell you, that's what we've seen outwork in the last week. It's a lust for power and influence, and to retain influence. It's a lust for popularity. We're all kind of guilty of this, into some form, aren't we? I have these battles. Popularity, influence, affluence. And I kind of end up thinking about it, these words that we devise, and I think we buy into them, words like significance. And sometimes I've heard it said, have you heard it said, I'm not after, I can't remember what it is, I'm not after, but I'm going to live a life of significance. We've heard that, haven't we? And you know what? I think some of these words can sound good, but you know what? They can lead you down a path that ends up looking exactly the same. It looks like affluence and influence. It really does. But it sounds like, no, I don't want any of that. I just want to, kind of live simply, and I just want to have significance. And I'm like, I've done that a little bit. I was in Cambodia earlier this year, because the other word that comes up is the word legacy. You heard that one, right? And I was in Cambodia, and I'm meeting with this woman, Thanan. And Thanan is a woman who actually makes a lot of the stuff that I sell through Foxglove Project. And she's this fabulous woman in probably about 40 now. And she started off in incredible poverty, and she has no fingers, but she learnt to sew on a machine, which an NGO taught her. So she just off her knuckles. Now she employs about 20 people, and she runs her own business, and she's actually got a shop on the waterfront. She's like spectacular, right? In terms of what she has built her life. So I go to dinner with her. She takes me to this little shop next door to her, and she's going to buy me dinner. And I said to her, is your daughter, who was about 20 now, is she going to take over the business with you? So she looks at me and she says, no, she's not going to take over the business. I was like, oh. I said, is your son, she's got a son, is your son going to take over the business? Is he going to take over what you've built, you spent all these years building? And she looks at me and she goes, no. And there was no concern on her face. And I said to her, but how do you feel about that? Like, your legacy. You're not going to leave behind, they're not going to build on your legacy. And she looks at me. She says, Kelley, my legacy is not in a business. My legacy is in the woman I've become. I was like, whoa. She says, my children have got the woman I have become, and that is their legacy. I thought, it was such a spectacular, I thought, how often do I don't even mean to, but I get caught up in this cultural definition of significance and of legacy and of influence and affluence. I don't want to be, do you? But it's actually easy. It's really easy. I like what Richard Foster says. He says that this pursuit of affluence and influence is a psychosis. He says it permeates even our mythology. The modern hero is the one who purposefully becomes rich rather than the one who voluntarily becomes poor. Oh, so true. Covetousness we call ambition, and hoarding we call prudence, and greed we call industry. And I'm guilty of them all. Because culture is incredibly powerful. And yet, in the midst of it, I really want to more and more. And I think it's getting easier as I get older, actually, to embrace simplicity. It's getting older. It's getting easier because what I'm discovering is that all of this stuff that I thought was a delusion and an illusion. Has anyone else discovered that? Like all this stuff I thought I was kind of aspiring or somehow would define me as being successful. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not even important. It's not even important. I'm watching my mum and my mother-in-law into their 80s, and they will leave this world with nothing, really with nothing. And I'm not just saying, because you get old, you die, you have nothing. I'm saying because they have not got a whole lot of stuff. And they are the richest of women. And I'm like, what am I going to pursue for 20 years? And I really would like to see myself pursuing more and more a life of simplicity. And how do I find it? I think the first thing about it does start inward. It doesn't start by trying to cut off everything we've got. I think they become the evidences. But I think it's like this inward, taking this inward kind of like audit of me. Even when we come and we kind of come for a weekend service like this, and I think we come because somehow we long for the silver bullet or the piece of information that will reveal to us what I could change or what I could do better. But I think ultimately, the thing is we come because we come to hear from him. We come to hear the whisper of what I could let go of what it is really like to be like you, Jesus. What is it like? Let go of judgment. Let go of expectations. Let go of reputation. Reputation is I tell you what, it can taunt you. And believe instead that what God says is that I will justify you. Even if it looks like your good name has been ruined. And if anything needs a starting point of this internal, it really is a topic like this. And I've actually thought of this as this for me is this idea of settling life on the inside. That's where simplicity starts. Settling life on the inside. Listen up. And I mean listen up, not listening out. Because I think when we can actually do that, we can actually become truly free. I like this idea that the definition of the internal condition is actually contentment. Contentment. And that means to be satisfied. I reckon it's weird how we can almost find it a pursuit to be satisfied. And I'm sure that's because of noise of culture, which tells us surely there's more, I should have more. And yet here's Scripture saying to us, no, be satisfied, be content. There was a great song I heard, what was his name? Not the Paul Butler Trio, not the John Butler Trio. I always get confused, Paul Coleman and John Butler. Does anyone else do that? Okay, no, you don't. Okay, I do. John Butler Trio, and he had that great song, which is, life always looks better on the other side. All we want is what we can't have. And so often I think we do live like that. The grass is greener on the other side. And yet here's this call from Scripture to be content. To be content, have this sense of contentment on the inside. I love Philippians 4 when it says, not that I speak from want. This is what Paul's saying. He says, for I've learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and in every circumstances, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. And I like to think the secret is because I can do all things through him who strengthens me. He says, I've learnt the secret. I can do everything because he's in me. Whether I have much or whether I have little. I grew up, and I think I've said this before, I grew up in Embleton till I was about 8. And then my dad and mum got in, my dad was this businessman and he was an entrepreneurial businessman, like crazy, right? And so next minute we moved to City Beach and we had this amazing home. I used to think of it as the side doors that went down the side, the outside, they were those swinging doors. And I remember we used to just run up and down that, just swinging them open like we were in the Wild West, Like we would do that by the hour because we were like, wow, look at this house. We had a sunken lounge room. And that was high praise indeed in those days, okay? And we had a velour lounge suite. And the 2 single chairs in that velour lounge suite spun around. Like, we were something. We had 2 cars that were air-conditioned in the 1960s, a white Fairmont and a white Fairlane. I still remember. I don't even know cars, but somehow I remembered that. Must have got this psyche happening. We had an abundance. And then, as good entrepreneurs do, the next day we lost everything. Dad had another harebrained scheme and everything was gone. And we came home one day to see all the furniture being taken away, the cars being taken away. I was like, I don't know what's happening today. And we moved into Morley, which then was like the fringes. Back now it's kind of like considered to be inner city, but then it was the fringes of civilization. And we had this house on Morley Drive. And I remember we went in there and we hardly had any furniture. We had no car. And Dad obviously couldn't afford to turn on the electricity, so we had a generator at the back of the house that ran the power. So we had power in the house. I still thought we were rich. I honestly had no idea. I went to school and told the story of, I'm sure you all don't have power, but we have a generator at our house, as if it was making this statement of great affluence. I don't know if it was as easy for Mum and Dad, but as a child, it was this wonderful experience for me of understanding whether I have a lot or whether I have little, it all can be the same to me. It's a great encouragement even now. Can I be the same, irrespective of if I have great influence, seemingly, or if I have none? Can I listen to people if they look like they have great affluence or whether they have nothing? People have no value based on what they have. They have value based on who they are. And the greatest deception is that we think that someone who has more somehow has more to say. And you know what can be the greatest deception? Because you have more, you think you have more to say. We don't. My father was also an incredibly, he was so egalitarian it was frightening. And I remember going with him to a demolition site. He was a demolisher. He became a demolisher after the last extravaganza. We moved to become a demolisher. And I remember he had a bad accident. And in this accident, this wall fell on him. It was hilarious, actually, because he was sitting behind the wall having lunch and the guys who were driving the machinery didn't realise and they tipped a wall on top of him. And this huge limestone wall fell on Dad and he broke his pelvis and he broke his legs and, he was a bit of a mess. Anyway, he had to lie. He had to come home for a few days, I say, because, he was in too much pain till he can kind of get himself going again. But he said to me one time, he says, Kelley, you've got to take me down to the demolition site. And I'm like, Dad, you can't move. He goes, don't worry, I'll lie in the back of the station wagon. You drive me there and then just help me out and I'll go to the site. And I was like, Dad, this is ridiculous. But I was like 19, so you just do what you're told when your father says that, don't you? So I drove Dad down to this demolition site. Even more ridiculous, Dad only had on his jocks and his dressing gown because everything else was too painful to put on. So he literally had this, like one of those tartan dressing gowns tied around him and his jocks, which was shocking, He always had bad jocks. Anyway, I have to help him out of the car, but then he goes onto the site and he's meeting with this developer. This big guy, this developer who now I know him, and he's a very high-flying developer, and Dad's on the demolition site in his jocks and his little thing, having a chat to him. And this man, I'm sure one side of him thought, this man is crazy. But you know what? The other side of him just treated Dad as exactly who he was, because he was just like, doesn't matter who you are. You are who you are. Could we live like that? It's not how I turn up. It's not how I dress up. And it's not how I drive up that tells you of a person's worth. It's actually who they are. I have learned the secret, and I think the loneliest of men or women are the people who say they're self-made. I think it's such a lonely existence. Because you're not self-made. We were made by God. We were made by him. We were given talents, we were given abilities, we're given strength, we're given courage, we're given peace. I'm not self-made. I am creator-made. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to feel like. You know, not only do we, if we can find simplicity, we can live it. We can live simplicity. Let me just get to the right scripture and not make a terrible mistake. But godliness with contentment is great gain. Here's the scripture. For we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. Let's be clear, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. But you, man, women of God, flee from all this. Pursue righteousness and godliness and faith and love and endurance and gentleness. Fight the good fight of faith. Take hold of the eternal life to which you were called when you made your good confession in the presence of many witnesses. You know, this inward life of contentment has this outward expression. Like you can't get away from it. Jesus had the rich young ruler, and the first thing he said to the rich young ruler was, what did he say to him? When he came asking for help, what's the first thing that Jesus said? Come on, we know. Sell everything you've got. Give it away. And then the rich young ruler went on to say he'd done all that, and Jesus had to say something about that inward reality wasn't there. You've got the outwards right, but inwardly, you're not dependent on me. But first of all, what Jesus says is, come on. Our lives should look like this. We can't escape the fact and say, look, I've got the inward reality, everything else is cool. It will be evident in the way we live. And it's just hard. That's all. Until we get this inward thing sorted, it's not always easy to have the outward life look like simplicity. I've kind of had a few thoughts of how I could do this and a few things that I've worked at. One thing I've thought about was determining the enough line. In our lives, determine the enough line. Sometimes it's easier to determine that when you're younger, because it's like as you get older, it keeps going up. Do you know what I mean? If we think of an axis being income and we think of the vertical axis, the horizontal axis being time, if we could set that enough line and it's kind of based on, well, what do I need? What kind of lifestyle am I going to live? You know, that's what it looks like financially right now. And, you know, and underneath that line, you might think of this idea of, look, 80% I spend on what we need and 10% on what we give away and 10% I can save. And above the line, but once we reach the line and we go above it, we can be more and more generous, can't we? But you know what most of us do is as the income comes up, guess what happens to the expenditure? Come on. We all keep it, and you think to yourself, do you not think to yourself, I can't believe how much I've ratcheted all that up from what I was so content with. I think just identifying the enough line is like a really helpful way. And sometimes what you do is when you get to the enough line, you actually just drop the income back. You just don't work as hard, and you think, in terms of, I shouldn't say work as hard, but you don't work on things that necessarily bring back money. You get involved in voluntary things, you get involved in charity life, you get involved in giving out. But I reckon another really helpful thing is, for me, is to identify the addictions in our life. I've got a few addictions, right? Has anyone else got a few addictions? They're not easy to always identify because sometimes we think of them as the really obvious things. Like, if you can always point your finger at someone who's buying a new cars all the time. It's like, oh yeah, that's... Don't look at everyone else. What's yours? I've got a few. I'm not telling you, by the way. This is not Revelation Day. This is just admitting to the frailties are just as evident in me. But if you think about, if I want to live simply, then I can do that. I think another thing we can do is think about being generous to others. It's a great way. Sometimes, I went on Neil went on a trip actually away to, I think it was that to Thailand? I think he went. I'll tell it in a minute. Okay, I'll tell you. You'll get it in a minute. Anyway, he took a team, and but when they got there, people had taken gifts to give to someone in the developing world. And when the person had their gifts and they got them out ready to distribute them, they got out a radio. But the radio was broken. They gave that to the people of the developing world. They gave away a pack of cards and they said, a couple are missing, but you won't notice that. And I was like, when Neil told me, I'm like, how do we do that? I think generosity looks like when you give your best. That's what generosity looks like. It looks like giving my best. This week I've given away a few things in my storage shed. They weren't my best. They were things that I've had, and I've had there like a dryer and a heater, and I enjoyed giving them away. Please don't get me wrong, it was fabulous. I had them advertise them free on Gumtree, and I was like having a ball. But it wasn't really generosity because I didn't need them. But how can generosity give your best? And the other thing about generosity is don't let generosity make other people have suffered, Like, I'm really careful about buying things that are made in the developing world. I'm careful about it. Because sometimes that's been done at other people's expense. It really has. It's not a good deal if it's cost someone else too much. It's not a good deal if it's cost someone else too much. And then I think we can always ask ourselves that question, how am I feeling right now? When you want to buy something, how am I feeling right now? Because sometimes I buy stuff when I'm feeling a little bit sad. Does anyone else do that? Okay, I got a few sad people. Sometimes I buy it and I feel excited. The whole world's my oyster. You just got to do a little internal check. How am I feeling? Is this a good thing to buy right now? Because I want to live a life goal which is just simple, more simple than it is today. I just want to be more simple tomorrow than I am today. And then I think finally we can live more simply when we speak plainly. Speak plainly. Check our language. Check our language around arrogance and pride, around racism, around sexism. Just to make sure that it's clear that what we're saying is what we mean to say. What we're asking is what we mean to ask for. This life of simplicity, it starts inward. It really does. But it's seen outward. And if you look at something in yourself and you go, you know what, I think that's a bit of an issue to me, don't just try and cut it off, which is what we tend to do. Oh, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to buy that anymore. Try to look in. What's going on in me? What is going on in me? Is it a need to be accepted? I had a youngish woman speak to me this week, and she was saying to me, and I thought this is where this kind of thing of culture can really affect us. She said that she really had this sense in her life that she was called to be a leader in something. She's in her 40s, so it probably doesn't sound that young to everyone else, does it? Very young to me. She's a girl. And And she had this, she says, I felt this thing about leadership, and she felt like God was even saying to her, it's time to lead. So she was telling me that she works in a school context, and there came a number of jobs came up. And she didn't get these jobs, right? So then she says, and this other younger woman got these jobs. So then she's meeting with me and she says, you know what, Kelley, what's going on? I think this call to leadership, and I put my hand up and nothing happens. I didn't get the role. And I said to her, do you know what? She says, am I doing the wrong thing? Should I be a bit more pushy about myself? Which is kind of a human reaction, isn't it? Like, I'll be a bit more pushy, I'll be a bit more forthright. I said to her, no. I said, the deception is of what leadership means. Your call to be an influencer is the kind of person you are. I reckon it's God whispering to you, you've got stuff in you. Tell people, speak up, lead. It's not a position, it's not a title. It's not even an income. It might never eventually look like that. But if you actually go after something in this incredibly human way, and it comes to you, you might just end up finding it's a deception. It's happened to me a number of times when I've pursued something and then later on I've thought, oh wow, I don't know if I really wanted that. Simplicity just says, you know what, God, I'm going to do my best, I'm going to give my absolute very best, but I'm leaving you to work it out. You know, ultimately, spiritual simplicity puts everything on the line. It puts everything on the line. It starts with God, and it says, I want God first. His ways, his values, his opinions. And I'm prepared to face and address anything that wants to push God second place, even with the best of intentions. I want my yes to be yes, my time with God to be unquestionable, and my priority for God's priorities to be uncompromising. And to live like this, it goes back to where we started this morning. It goes back to the whisper of God. His strength. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I reckon living simply is where it all begins. As this month we talk about the ideas of these inner disciplines, let's not make them things we're striving to be. Let's actually recognise they're actually an internal condition that then affects the outside. And nothing's ever more true than the idea of simplicity. Let's just bow our head, let's just close our eyes before we come to the table. Let's just remind ourselves that He and He alone is the beginning of our faith. God, I pray right now that pursuing you and what you have for us comes second. We pursue you first and you bring things to pass. That when we feel really, I sometimes feel, God, inside that it's not working the way that I thought it would work. It's not happening the way I thought it would happen. And I'm just asking you that where that reveals something in me, that I let you speak to it. That we change deep within, even at the core of our being, and we live out of that.